Are you ready to tell part 3? This is kind of the big piece, right? Yes? You signed yes? Okay. So we're going to talk about the day you had the wreck. I don't know if you even remember it. Do you remember riding with Steven and heading to the ball game? And riding in the helicopter? It was okay. It wasn't a good game. It was the Alabama LSU game, right? Let's start a little bit before that. This is piece 3, 103 of pieces of our journey to where we're here. The 16th wreck-iversary of when Chris had the wreck. That's really why we're here, right? Because that's what happened. We had a wreck. You had a wreck, huh? I had moved to Chicago in July of 2008. Chris actually spent the summer of 2008 here in Oklahoma. We had been living in Louisiana for about 10 years at the time, and I moved to Chicago. I came through Oklahoma and saw my parents and my family, and Chris and Renelle. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see him before his wreck. All right, we talked a lot on the phone though, but we were both doing some weird things. As I began to get ready for Chicago, I just felt like I was supposed to move to Chicago, and I still to this day don't know why, because it was so short of a stay, about 3.5 months, right? It was a time of my life, though. It was an adventure every day. I loved Chicago. One of my friends said, yeah, you finally found a place that can keep up with your energy. I'm like, maybe so, right? But I kept telling everyone, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to get there just in time for tragedy. And in my mind, it was so big, and boy, was it, but I had no idea. I just kept saying, I'm going to get there in time for tragedy, and I don't know what I mean by that, but and in my mind, and in my heart, it felt whatever that word meant. I felt it so big. I thought there was going to be this massive earthquake, and I was going to be there, and maybe I was going to be the hero of the story and help save people and work shelters like I did during Hurricane Katrina, or I guess food distribution and things like that. But I thought it was going to be something on that scale. And finally, one day, my pastor, Dad T, Papa Tisdale, he said, it's going to be your tragedy too. And it just hit me that it was going to hurt me too. It wasn't just going to be something that happened and I was going to be able to just, this is really bad for y'all, that I was going to feel it too. And so I started kind of thinking a little bit differently about it at that point, I had no idea what it was going to be, right? And after I moved to Chicago, Chris called me. Now, Chris did not call ever. Typical early 20s sons don't call their mamas, and he didn't call. But once I moved to Chicago, he called first to go, you left me here, everybody's gone but me. So he had one semester of school left at Natchitoches there, or Northwestern there in Natchitoches, Louisiana, and he had actually taken the semester off, and he was substitute teaching to make extra money on the side, besides being a musician too, which, he was a starving musician, but he was a great musician, and he had lots of gigs and stuff, and he had taken the semester off, and so we were talking a lot once I moved to Chicago. And of course, I was telling him my story of my adventure. I got 3 jobs. Within 2 weeks, I had 3 jobs. I was working at TJ Maxx in the mornings, 4 mornings a week, I think it was, getting the store prepped and opened and cleaned before. Not the janitorial services, but making sure everything else, the break room and all those things, and everything was in place. And then I worked at Our Lady of Victory Catholic Church as a kind of a sub. I kind of did everything. I worked in the office. I just kind of came in and floated wherever she needed me. Sometimes I subbed in the classroom because of my teaching, experience, and sometimes I made copies. I just did a little bit of everything. I was just happy to have that job. I did that Monday through Friday, like from between TJ Maxx and Sylvan. Then I worked Sylvan in the evenings about 4 or 5 days a week. So I was working 3 different jobs. I didn't work all 3 jobs every day, but some days I did. And so I was working and having a ton of my life. Man, it was great. And Chris and I started talking a lot more. He started saying some really weird things. He was say things like, I feel like I need to just get on my motorcycle and ride to California. Just ride off. And I'm like, well, why would you need to do that? And then he would say something like, I got to go through the desert, but then I'm going to see God. And I'm like, Chris, you're not making any sense. You think God lives in California? I know that's not true. No offense, right? And I'm like, you're not making any sense. And he just kept saying, I don't know. I just need to go through the desert. I don't even know what I'm saying. I just need to see God. I'm going to see God. I know I'll see God on the other side of whatever it is. And I'm like, okay. And then his girlfriend at the time, he he said, he was telling her the same types of things. And we had actually agreed. I said, let's just tell him next time, get on your motorcycle and go, because you need to get this out of your system. Just get it out of your system and just go. And so we had agreed we were going to say that. Then he told her this thing. He said, I don't know what I'm talking about, but when the time comes, lay me on the altar like Abraham did Isaac and walk away. He said, just walk away. It will be okay. And of course, that didn't make sense at the time. We would talk behind his back. Sorry, Chris. But we would talk behind his back and we'd say, what is he talking about? He's talking crazy. He's just saying crazy things like that didn't make sense until on into the journey. And then we were like, oh, wow. Right? So, excuse me. And so that was all the 2 or 3 weeks leading up to the wreck. The day of the wreck, I was working at TJ Maxx early that morning. I was going in at 7 in the morning and getting the store ready. And before it opens, I only worked from, I think, 7 to 11 those mornings. And about 8:30, I was in the break room and my phone rang, I think, or something. And it was Ranella. And it was really weird for her to call because she knew I was at work and stuff. And so, but I was actually mopping, I think. I can't remember what I was doing. But I was in the break room. And she called. And she was crying so hard that I couldn't even understand what she was saying. Something about a helicopter, something about a wreck. And she kept saying, it sounded like she said, Mama was in a wreck. And I was like, but I'm the mama. So it didn't make sense to me, right? If I'm the mama. But she was crying hysterically. And finally I said, Ranella, take a big breath and slow down. I can't tell what you're saying. And she finally gathered herself between sobs and eked out, Bubba has been in a wreck and he's been metaflighted to Shreveport Trauma Center. Yeah, you remember that? And I literally, that was a call no parent ever wanted to hear. You know, that's the one that we all fear. Well, it happened. And we're still here. We're good. But I literally felt my legs just go out from under me as I fell to my knees there. And I said, okay, I'll head down. I'll figure something out. And I remember calling my friend Mary and telling her, pray. Chris was in a wreck. And I remember going to a person there in the store who her daughter had a wreck in Florida and she couldn't get to her because there was a blizzard in Chicago. And I said, please pray for me. I'm living your story. My son's been in a wreck and please pray. And, you know, in my mind, I thought I was just going to go to him, get him better, and then we'd go on about our lives, you know. I mean, I had gotten rid of everything. There wasn't a home. I couldn't just go get him and take him home. I had no idea what was going on. I went back to the house. I had no money, but I went back and I started looking at the computer trying to buy a ticket. And the people I were staying with, who had been total strangers when I moved there and became friends, of course, that's another whole story. Maybe that'll be another, maybe someday. And the man, he goes, go pack your bag and I'll buy your ticket. I'm like, well, I don't even know how long I'm going to stay. They said, we're going to buy you a one-way ticket and then you can come back. We'll get you back here later. Let's just get you there. And they had some sense, and so that I didn't have because I was in kind of a state of shock. So I packed a bag, sort of. I had a little Targus bag that I'd carried in ministry all those years, right? And I stuck my laptop in there, a little Toshiba. That little puppy worked for a long time. And a clean pair of underwear. You needed to know that, right? Hey, we're keeping it real. And I know, right? And my Bible, my journal, and several pens, my phone charger, because we didn't have the phones we have now. You need to cough again and cough it out, and you're okay. And so, I mean, just minimal, maybe a bottle of water, probably not, because you can't take that on a plane. And I got on the L and rode to O'Hare. And when I got to O'Hare, they looked at my ticket. The guy looked at my ticket, and he looked at me, and he went, stand over there. And so they took me, they went through all my bags and all that. So I just waited, and finally I said, look, I'm just trying to get to my son. He's been in a wreck, and I'm trying to get back to him. Why did you pull me aside and go through all my stuff? And she said, well, you bought a one-way ticket. You had one bag. You only bought the ticket 2 hours ago. You know, all of the things were those warning things that they had to worry about, you know, with terrorists and things like that. So I stood there and she said, thanks for being patient. I said, well, did I have any other option? I didn't really feel like I had another option. So, but anyway, I flew out. Before I flew out, I did get nobody would talk to me over the phone. I finally got the chaplain, and her name was Chaplain. Her last name was Shepherd. She was such a blessing. The time we stayed there at the hospital, she was my favorite chaplain, and she finally told me that she could tell me that Chris had a head injury. They didn't know how bad it was, and they would have to check the swelling every few hours. Now, I know nothing much about brain injury, of course, at that time, and that they would have to check it every few hours, and that they might have to remove part of his skull. I mean, all of this was like freaking me out big time, because I didn't know all these terms, and I certainly wasn't familiar with how brain injuries worked and stuff. Did you know all that stuff? Right? But they really wouldn't hardly tell me anything. I had called Apostle Tisdale. That's where I went to church when I had lived in Louisiana, and asked him to go up until I could get there, just to be. I needed somebody to be with Chris until I could get there, and so he did do that. He stayed until Renella and their dad got there, and they got there probably about 2 or 3 in the afternoon, something like that. So they were there with him. I wanted him to be. I needed family there, so it took me all day to fly. I don't even remember where we went through. I remember stopping at least one place, maybe Atlanta. I can't remember. You okay? I can't remember which one, but I think it was Atlanta. It took me all day to get there, and I felt so far away. And emotions were all over the place. What am I going to find when I get there? That had to be the longest day of my life, trying to get to my son, all I know is he's been in a wreck and he's bumped his head. Okay, so he kind of got hit in the head with a truck. Did you know you got hit in the head with a truck? That's why we won't have a Dodge Ram 1500, just so you know, right? It's uncomfortable this morning. I know. And anyway, so I finally got to the airport around 7, and I think Ronnie, their dad, picked me up and took me to the ICU, which they had real strict visiting hours, but since I was the mama and I hadn't been in there, they let me come in and see Chris. And he looked so good. But when I got to the ER, or when I got to the waiting room, the SICU waiting room, still knowing nothing much except what little they knew, very little more. When we walked in, there was a crowd of, it was probably 35 or 40 people at least. It was packed with his friends, with his instructors from school. Bill Brent was there. I believe Kenneth Green was there. And just all these young people there for Chris. That was so, it was overcoming. You can tell it's still overcoming. It was just a blessing that all those people were there. And I was like, who are all these people? And they're like, they're his friends. And I was like, wow, he had friends? So they took me back and I saw him, and he would end up staying in ICU for 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks, because he got MRSA. He did not open his eye for 21 days. He was on the vent. Now by the time I got there, he was already breathing a little on his own. But he was breathing over the vent a little, but it was still there for if he stopped breathing and things. So finally we pieced it all together that somebody had given his friend tickets to the LSU Alabama game. And so they were headed south on I-49 going from Natchitoches to Baton Rouge early that morning to get to the game in time to see the LSU Alabama game, and which LSU lost. It was a really bad game, by the way. And Chris wanted to smoke, and so his friend pulled off of the interstate, because he couldn't smoke in the car, and let him. And I don't know if he let him smoke or if he was still, if he smoked first or not. I don't know what happened, but he stopped at the stop sign, and when he pulled out, he didn't see traffic coming, and a Dodge Ram 1500 with the big grill thingy on the front, T-boned on Chris's side, and he literally took the brunt of it. And actually, the young man driving, Chris said, "Stop!" And I guess it was his last word, "Stop." Well, I don't know. He said "Mom" 2 or 3 times, so I guess that doesn't count. But the young man turned to look and actually saw Chris get hit in the head with the truck. He actually saw it happen because he looked to see what was going on, because he hadn't seen the truck. And so I read his post. He sent Chris a message later that night, or maybe it was a couple of weeks later. I don't know when he sent the message, but just that. And he had described what he had seen, and he was just praying he would live, because he was so afraid, because Chris wasn't breathing. Chris didn't breathe. On that impact, a lot of times you stop. And then Chris took a big, deep breath. And anyway, so he was Medi-Flighted. The young man was okay. He did puncture a lung also, and he was taken by ambulance to a local hospital, and then he was flown to Shreveport later that night. And so they were both in the same hospital, and a couple of days later, when he could get up and around a little bit, they actually brought him down in a wheelchair. It was in a wheelchair, but they did bring him down to see Chris. And I have to say, that was a heart-wrenching moment. I put my arm around his mom, and I said, "I'm so sorry, because I got the same phone call you did." And even though it wasn't Chris's fault, and that was okay. But the other young man, when he saw Chris, just broke down and began to weep. And we just had to give him that moment. I mean, there wasn't anything else to do, right? But that was heart-wrenching. And I did go up and talk to him 2 or 3 times while he was still in the hospital, and told him that we weren't going to sue him. It wouldn't fix anything. And it was an accident, and it's called an accident because it's an accident, and that we forgave him. Now, I will have to say, over the years, I've had to work through that forgiveness sometimes. I hold nothing against him now. I could hug the young man. Well, he's old now. He's old like you. He's 40 like you, Chris. Or actually, he's still 38, so he's younger than you. But anyway, so he would end up being in ICU for 3 weeks. I also remember I went in, and all I knew is that he had hit his head. He had a head injury, and you couldn't even see it. He got one little staple, and I'm like, that's it. I've had over 100 stitches in my head. That's all you got from all that was one little staple. And so they monitored him, of course, for every 3 hours. They took a CAT scan. I think it was 3 hours, might have been 6. They would take him down for a CAT scan to make sure it wasn't swelling, because they could remove part of the skull and put it back later. That was a whole nother story. That didn't happen. We were very thankful for that. And then I would go back and found out that his lungs had been crushed, his ribs had been crushed. The right ribs, because that right side took the brunt, the right ribs were crushed. And still to this day, when he gets x-rays, they say, these ribs are healed, but there's they show signs that they were broken. There was not a rib in even 2 pieces on the right side. They were all 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. They were just shattered pretty much. And then there was 5 ribs that just had straight breaks, 5 or 6 on the left side. I know, it was painful, wasn't it? Nah, he's just got a cough. So anyway, so then every time we had to sit out in the waiting room, and we just had to wait for them to come and tell us things. And we just, they would come. They were pretty good at communicating. And but then every time I would go back, there would be something else. So finally I went, okay, I'm not leaving this little cubicle until you give me a list of his complete injuries. I can't come back here and find something new every time. I'm not leaving until a doctor comes and tells me every single thing that is injured, down from the littlest to the biggest. I don't care. I've got to know. I can't come back here for all these surprises. So they brought a whole list. Here's the list, basically. Of course, he had the brain injury. That's the main thing. And that's the only thing that he still has left, of course. But he had actually broken his neck. They said had it been a millimeter in the wrong direction, either in one direction, I can't remember. They said it was a horrible break in the perfect spot. It would have been a whole different story had that break not been where it was. And they said if he had been up and around, they would have put the halo on him to totally keep him from moving his neck altogether. He would have worn a halo, but he wasn't, so he wore the big collar for 3 months, something like that, make sure that it was all healed. So he had the broken neck. He actually broke his back, but it was just the ends of the vertebrae. 2 or 3 of those broke off. And they said that's really minor. If he came in with just that, they'd say, here's some Tylenol, go fly, be free. It would be no big deal. He had lacerated his kidney. He had all the ribs that were broken. The neck was broken. I think that was most of the lungs, of course, he had a tube in because this lung had collapsed because it had been crushed. That's what keeps him out of the oxygen chamber right now too, because the lung collapsed, and we can't take that chance of the lining could not hold up under the pressure of a hyperbaric oxygen chamber. Although we're still investigating that a little bit, but I think that was most of it. That was most of the injuries. And like I said, we were there 3 weeks, and the only thing he would do is move a toe when I would talk to him. So he was in there. He never was in a coma. He was basically just kind of knocked out, but he was not in a coma. But he was very low on the Glasgow scale. I think it's called Glasgow. And he did have brain activity, but it was very, very slow, but it was there. And so we knew he was alive. And he wasn't on the vent very long, but he was in ICU for 3 weeks. And I'm going to cut the story here, and then the next video will be about our lengthy hospital stay. That'll be the next segment, and I don't know if I'll do that tonight or tomorrow, but I will try to get that done soon. So stay tuned, because there's a lot more story to come. He has come so far. You know, they told us, the first thing they told us after they ran some more tests was he would just be a vegetable. You want to be a carrot or a broccoli? Oh, I think you should be a Brussels sprout. You want to be a Brussels sprout? What do you think? They said he would be a vegetable. Well, he obviously is not that, right? And then they said he would make a full recovery. It would just take a long time. And so I think we landed somewhere in between. But the exciting part is how much improvements he's made in the last 2 years of this 16-year journey. So stick with us. I'll have another piece of our journey coming and tell you more details of this story. I probably have to talk about redefining faith, because that was one of the things while we were there. Is I kept thinking God was going to ride in on a white horse and just raise Chris up. We're going to have a great story, right? God's riding in on a white horse, and so I went through a period of redefining my faith, because I thought, you know, this can't happen. I was fixing to go to Africa, but I'll have to share that later. But it was definitely I look back on it and go, wow, God was definitely with me and with us, but it was definitely the darkest days, I should say, of my life. Totally rearranged everything, right? So here we are. Stay tuned for piece 4 coming soon.